Hi everyone, today we are going to start 7.4, which is special right triangles. And our goal is to use the relationships among the sides in special right triangles. The first special right triangle we are going to talk about is the 45-45-90 triangle theorem. A 45-45-90 triangle is an isosceles right triangle that can be formed by cutting a square in half as shown. Here is our little cheat sheet for a 45-45-90 triangle. We know that it's an isosceles triangle, meaning that the legs are congruent. So I have that written here. We know that our legs are congruent. Now, the hypotenuse, which is across from the 90-degree angle, is going to be equal to the leg times radical 2. So whatever the length of the leg is, we are going to multiply that number by radical 2, and we will find the length of the hypotenuse. I would make sure to write these down as well as this diagram somewhere in your notes. Find the length of the hypotenuse. All right, so for A, we know that we have a side of 8, which is our leg. So what is the other length of this leg? Well, it also has to be 8. So the hypotenuse is across from the 90-degree angle, so I need to figure out what is this length. Well, if we go back to our cheat sheet, we see that the hypotenuse is equal to the leg times radical 2. So if I move forward, we know that my hypotenuse is equal to the leg times radical 2. Well, my leg is 8. I'm going to multiply that by radical 2. So 8 radical 2 is my answer for the length of the hypotenuse. Let's look at B here. So I see that these are my legs. My leg is equal to 3 radical 2. Once again, I know that my hypotenuse is equal to the leg times radical 2. So let's plug in what we know the leg is. The leg is 3 radical 2. I need to multiply that by radical 2. You can plug this right into your calculator, but notice that radical 2 times radical 2, if you plug that into your calculator, you end up just getting 2. So we have 3 times 2, which simplifies to 6. So our hypotenuse for part B is equal to 6. Find the lengths of the legs. So now, if I look at my diagram, I know the length of the hypotenuse. So how can I figure out what is the length of the leg? Well, thinking back to our cheat sheet, we know that the hypotenuse is equal to the leg times radical 2. Well, I know that the hypotenuse is 5 radical 2, so let's write that in our equation. 5 radical 2 is equal to the leg times radical 2. I notice that I have radical 2 on both sides of my equal sign, so I can cancel those out, which means that 5 is equal to our leg. So x here then is going to equal 5, and this is also going to equal 5. The next type of triangle we are going to talk about is the 30-60-90 triangle theorem. A 30-60-90 triangle can be formed by dividing an equilateral triangle in half. When you do so, you end up with a 30-60-90 triangle. Now once again, here's my diagram and how things compare to each other. With a 30-60-90 triangle, you have a short side, a long side, and the hypotenuse. So for your cheat, we know that the long leg, which is here, is equal to the short leg, which we called x, looking at this diagram, times radical 3. We can look at the hypotenuse, and we know we can find the hypotenuse by also looking at the short leg and multiplying it by 2. So I would make sure that you write this cheat down in your notes, as well as drawing out this diagram. Quick review. Remember that you cannot have a radical in the denominator. How do you get rid of a radical in the denominator? Well, if I have 1 over the square root of 2, to get rid of the radical in the denominator, I'm going to multiply by a form of 1 using that radical. So radical 2 over radical 2, which simplifies to 1 times radical 2 is just 1 radical 2, divided by radical 2 times radical 2. If you plug that in your calculator, you end up getting 2. And I'm done here. This is simplified, and I don't have to do anything else because my radical is now gone. It is not in the denominator anymore. All right, so let's find the lengths in the 30, 60, 90 triangle. So looking at my diagram, I need to see what do I know and what am I looking for? Well, I know this side. Is this the short side, or the short leg, the long leg, or my hypotenuse? Well, I know y is my hypotenuse. 9 is across from the 60-degree angle, meaning that this is the long side. This is the short side, and y is the hypotenuse. All right, so let's write out our cheat. So since I know the long side, I want to start off with the cheat equation that involves my long leg. And I know that the long leg, I'm just going to put long, is equal to the short leg times radical 3. So let's write what we know. We know 9 is equal to the long leg, so I can put 9 is equal to the short leg times radical 3. And my goal here is I need to figure out what is the length of the short leg. Well, to do so, I need to divide by radical 3 on each side. Divide by radical 3. So this cancels. Scroll down, and I know that 9 over radical 3 is equal to my short leg. But wait, I'm not allowed to have a radical in the denominator. So when this happens, I need to multiply by whatever this denominator is in a form of 1. So here we go. 9 over radical 3. I'm going to multiply this by radical 3 over radical 3. This will then simplify. 9 times radical 3 is just 9 radical 3 divided by radical 3 times radical 3. You can plug that right into your calculator. You end up getting 3. Now if I look at my fraction, I notice I have a 9 in the numerator and a 3 in the denominator. That does simplify. If you plug 9 divided by 3 in your calculator, that fraction simplifies to 3. And I keep that radical 3 afterwards. And so that is the length of my short side. So I'm going to write that over here. 3 radical 3 is my length for x. Now I need to figure out what is my length for y. And looking back at our cheat that you should have written down, I know that the hypotenuse is equal to 2 times my short side. Well, I do know my short side. My short side is 3 radical 3. So 2 times 3 radical 3. I can take these two numbers and multiply them together. 2 times 3. So my hypotenuse is equal to 6 radical 3. I'm going to circle that. And up here, I know that y is equal to 6 radical 3. And I'm done. Don't worry, we're going to practice this again. All right, for number 7 here, I need to determine which side do I know. Well, I know this side here, which if I look at my triangle, it's across from the 30-degree angle, meaning this is my short side. So let's start with the hypotenuse. Let's see if I can figure out that length, which is x. And we know that the hypotenuse is equal to 2 times the short side. All right, well, let's plug in what the short side is equal to. So 2 times 5 radical 3. I can do this math. 2 times 5. 2 times 5 is 10. Radical 3 is the length of my hypotenuse, which is also x. Next, let's look at the length of the long leg. And remember, the equation for the long leg is equal to the short leg times radical 3. All right, so we know what the short leg is. It's 5 radical 3, so 5 radical 3 times radical 3. In this case, I can combine these radicals together. So if you plug this in your calculator, radical 3 times radical 3 is just equal to 3. So this turns into 5 times 3, and I'll underline that because this became that. Well, what is 5 times 3? That's just 15. So now I know that y is equal to 15, which is my long leg. Here are the last two problems that we're going to do. So for number 8, I have a 30, 60, 90 triangle. What do I know? Well, I know this side here. And if I look at my diagram, I know that that is the hypotenuse. So I do know the hypotenuse here. So looking at our cheat sheet, which equation involves the hypotenuse? Well, we know that the hypotenuse is equal to 2 times the short side. Well, the hypotenuse is really 8, so we know that 8 is equal to 2 times the short side. To get the short side by itself, I just need to divide by 2. So 4 is equal to the short side, which is also x. So this is going to equal 4. Next, I need to figure out what is the length of y, which is my long side. So the equation for the long side is the long side is equal to the short side times radical 3. All right, well, I don't know the long side, but I do know the short side. So the long side is equal to the short side is 4 times radical 3, and I'm done. So I can circle this. We know y is equal to 4 radical 3. The last problem here, number 9. What do I know? Well, I know 18, and 18 is across from the 60-degree angle, meaning that this is the long side. So which equation involves the long side? Well, we know that the long side is equal to the short side times radical 3. I know the length of the long side, which is 18, is equal to the short side times radical 3. To get the short side by itself, I need to divide by radical 3 on each side, so that cancels out. Divide this by radical 3. So 18 divided by radical 3 is equal to the short side, but remember, I cannot have a radical in my denominator. So 18 over radical 3. I need to multiply this by radical 3 over radical 3, so that my radical in the denominator cancels. So 18 times radical 3 is 18 radical 3 over radical 3 times radical 3 is just a positive 3. I can look at my number in my numerator and my denominator. Does that simplify? It does. 18 divided by 3 is 6. So I'm left with 6 radical 3 for the long side, and I'm going to scroll back up here, and that was, I'm sorry, not for the long side, for the short side. That's what I was searching for. So that is x. So 6 radical 3 is my x value. I still need to figure out what is my length of y, and y is my hypotenuse. So I'm going to scroll down again. So I know that the hypotenuse is equal to 2 times the short side. For my previous work right here, 6 radical 3 is my short side. So to find the hypotenuse, I just need to do 2 times 6 radical 3. 2 times 6 I can simplify, and 12 radical 3 then is my hypotenuse. So I can scroll up, and I know that y is equal to 12 radical 3. And I'm done.